The first laugh hit Marcus Reed before the glass doors of the Grand Alder Hotel even closed behind him. A sharp, careless sound that followed the scuff of his worn sneakers across Italian marble. And it set the tone for a night he would never forget. Because to the white men in tailored suits clustered near the chandeliered lobby, Marcus was nothing more than a black delivery worker who had wandered into a place he didn't belong. He felt their eyes crawl over his thrift store jacket, the faded backpack slung over one shoulder, the calm expression on his face that they mistook for confusion. "Hey, buddy, loading docks around back," one of them said, smirking as the others chuckled, their laughter echoing like coins tossed into a fountain of privilege. Marcus paused, meeting the man's gaze with a quiet steadiness that unsettled him just enough to prompt another laugh, louder this time, to reassure himself of his place in the world. Marcus had grown up learning that laughter like this was a weapon, one sharpened by generations of certainty, but he also knew something they didn't, something that made his pulse steady instead of racing. He adjusted his grip on the leather portfolio in his bag and walked toward the front desk, ignoring the murmurs that followed him. The receptionist, a blonde woman with a practiced smile, looked up and down at him before asking, "Can I help you?" in a tone that already assumed the answer was no. "I'm here for the Whitmore Gala," Marcus said, voice even, and that was when the laughter truly bloomed, spreading from the suits to the nearby guests in gowns and tuxedos, a soft, cruel sound that painted him as a joke. One man wiped a tear from his eye as he said, "You and half the city." "Pal," Marcus nodded as if accepting a truth, while inside him memories stirred his mother working double shifts, his father teaching him never to shrink, the long nights studying balance sheets and contracts while the world slept. The receptionist leaned closer, lowering her voice as if offering kindness. "Staff entrances, I'm not staff," Marcus said gently, and that was when a tall white man with silver hair stepped forward, amusement etched into every line of his face. "Son," he said, clapping Marcus on the shoulder with mock familiarity, "this is a private event. Billionaire family. Invitations only." Marcus met his eyes, and for a brief second, something flickered, their recognition maybe, or the absence of it, but it passed, replaced by certainty. "I know who they are," Marcus replied, and the man laughed again, turning to the others as if to share the punchline. Security began to move in, hands hovering near Marcus's arms, and the humiliation pressed down on him like a familiar weight, heavy but survivable, because he knew this was only the beginning. And somewhere above them all, in a penthouse suite glowing with quiet power, the truth waited like a storm gathering its strength. The guards' hands were firm, but not yet rough, as they guided Marcus toward the side of the lobby, the whispers growing louder, more confident, as if the crowd sensed an easy victory. And with every step, Marcus felt the tension coil tighter, not in his chest, but in the room itself. A subtle shift that went unnoticed by those too busy enjoying the spectacle. "I don't want trouble," one guard muttered, almost apologetic, while another smirked openly, enjoying the chance to enforce the unspoken rules. "Then you shouldn't have come," he said, and Marcus smiled faintly at that, because trouble had a way of finding him whether he came or not. As they passed a mirrored column, Marcus caught his reflection and saw not the man they saw, but the one he was. The one who had built companies quietly under shell names, who had learned early that power moved best when it moved unseen. The silver-haired man followed them, still talking, still performing for the crowd. "You see this?" he said loudly. "This is what happens when people don't know their place." The words landed like a slap, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus stopped walking. The guards hesitated, surprised. "My place," Marcus repeated softly, turning around, and something in his tone made even the laughter falter. "Yes," the man snapped, irritation creeping in now that his authority was questioned. "Not here." Marcus reached into his bag, slowly, deliberately, and the guards stiffened. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a simple black phone and tapped the screen once. The sound of an incoming call cut through the air, and then another and another, echoing from the pockets of the very men who had been laughing moments before. Confusion rippled through the group as the silver-haired man's smile froze, his phone vibrating insistently in his hand. He answered, face paling with every word he heard, while Marcus watched, saying nothing. The receptionist's eyes widened as she glanced at her own screen, then up at Marcus, a flicker of fear replacing disdain. "What did you do?" someone whispered, and Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying without effort. "I arrived." The silver-haired man hung up slowly, his confidence draining away like water from a cracked glass. "Who are you?" he asked, and the question sounded different now, stripped of mockery, heavy with something like dread. Before Marcus could answer, the elevator chimed, and a white-haired woman stepped out, her presence commanding immediate silence. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on Marcus, and her face softened into a smile that was anything but small. "There you are," she said, walking toward him, and the room tilted on its axis as she took his hands in hers. "We were wondering when you'd stop hiding." The revelation landed not like thunder, but like gravity, sudden and absolute, pulling every eye, every thought, every assumption into a new orbit as the woman turned to the stunned crowd and said, "This is Marcus Reed, my grandson," and the name Whitmore seemed to echo without being spoken, its weight crushing the laughter that had filled the room minutes before. Gasps rippled outward, faces blanching, minds scrambling to rewrite reality, while Marcus stood still, feeling the years of quiet preparation align into this single moment. The silver-haired man swayed as if struck, his earlier words hanging around his neck like a noose, and the guards released Marcus as though burned, stepping back with murmured apologies that fell uselessly to the floor. "Impossible," someone whispered, but the woman's grip on Marcus's hands was firm, proud. "Not impossible," she said coolly, "just inconvenient for those who prefer their power visible." She turned to Marcus, her eyes shining. "You ready?" He nodded, and together they walked toward the center of the lobby, every step a reversal, every gaze now lowered or pleading. The receptionist stammered an apology, the laughter replaced by a suffocating silence broken only by the pounding of humbled hearts. Marcus spoke then, not loudly, but with a clarity that carried. "I came tonight because I was curious," he said. "Curious to see who you are when you think no one important is watching." He let the words sink in. "Watching shame bloom where arrogance once lived. Some of you invested in my companies without knowing it. Some of you report to people who report to me. And all of you," he paused, meeting the silver-haired man's eyes, "decided who I was before I ever opened my mouth." The man looked away, defeated. Marcus felt a swell of emotion, not triumph, but release. The kind that comes from setting down a burden you were never meant to carry alone. His grandmother squeezed his hand, and in that touch was every sacrifice, every secret, every lesson passed down like an inheritance more valuable than money. "Let the gala begin," she said, and the music resumed, softer now, reverent, as the crowd dispersed, transformed by knowledge they couldn't unlearn. Marcus felt the night settle into something like peace. He hadn't come to shame them, though shame had found them anyway. He had come to stand fully in the truth of who he was, and as he looked around the glittering room, now quiet in its respect, he knew that for the first time. They saw him not as they wanted to, but as he had always been. The night didn't soften after the reveal, it sharpened. Every smile in the Grand Alder Hotel cutting a little too precisely, every apology landing with the hollow thud of self-preservation. And Marcus Reed felt it immediately as he moved through the gala beside his grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, whose presence commanded the room like a law of nature, because power recognized power even when it pretended not to. White faces that had laughed minutes earlier now glowed with admiration, so sudden it felt obscene. And the silver-haired man Harold Kemp, Marcus remembered, a hedge fund titan who'd once declined a partnership with one of Marcus's shell companies, hovered close, desperate to be seen, to be forgiven, to be included again in the invisible circle he'd assumed Marcus could never enter. "Marcus," Harold began, voice oily with contrition, "if I said anything earlier, you said exactly what you meant," Marcus replied calmly, cutting him off without raising his voice. And Harold flushed as nearby guests pretended not to listen while absorbing every syllable. Eleanor guided Marcus toward the head table, her hand light on his arm, and as they walked, whispers followed like a tide pulling back from shore, not mocking now but fearful, calculating, each person reassessing every past interaction through the lens of this new truth. The Whitmore family's wealth wasn't just legendary, it was structural, embedded in industries and governments, and Marcus, the black grandson no one had ever publicly acknowledged, was suddenly the axis around which futures might pivot. Yet the tension didn't come from their fear alone. It came from the fact that Marcus hadn't revealed everything, and those who understood power sensed it instinctively. As champagne flowed and a string quartet resumed playing, Marcus felt eyes on him from every corner, including from atop the staircase where Richard Whitmore III, Eleanor's son and Marcus's estranged uncle, watched with a tight smile that never reached his eyes. Richard descended slowly, applause parting for him, and stopped in front of Marcus, extending a hand that Marcus did not immediately take. "I wondered when you'd show up," Richard said, his tone measured, but his gaze sharp, assessing. "I was invited," Marcus replied simply, and Eleanor's grip tightened ever so slightly, a warning. Richard laughed, the sound polite, brittle. "Of course. Well, welcome to the family business." That phrase family business hung between them, heavy with history, exclusion, and secrets that had never been meant to surface here. Under crystal chandeliers and judgmental eyes, Marcus finally shook Richard's hand, and the contact sent a ripple through the room. Because this was no longer a story about a mistaken identity, it was about succession, control, and a reckoning that couldn't be postponed. "Enjoy the night," Richard said, leaning in close enough that only Marcus could hear the edge beneath the civility. "Tomorrow we talk." Marcus met his gaze, unblinking. "Tomorrow," he agreed, knowing full well that the real confrontation had only just begun, and that by morning, the Whitmore empire and everyone who had laughed at the wrong moment would look very different. Morning arrived like a verdict, sunlight cutting through the glass-walled boardroom atop the Whitmore Tower. As Marcus Reed took his seat at the long white table, every chair already filled by white executives who had spent the night scrambling, researching, and quietly panicking, because the humiliation of the gala had transformed into something far more dangerous: uncertainty. Richard Whitmore III stood at the head of the table, polished and controlled, flanked by attorneys and advisors who avoided Marcus's eyes, while Eleanor sat beside Marcus, calm as stone, her presence an unspoken promise that this meeting was not a courtesy but a reckoning. "Let's be clear," Richard began, clasping his hands. "Last night was unexpected, but the Whitmore Group has governance, procedures that I already own controlling interest in," Marcus said evenly, sliding a slim folder across the table, and the room froze as Richard's confidence fractured. The attorneys lunging for the documents like lifelines. Pages turned, faces drained of color, breaths caught. Because the truth unfolded with surgical precision, Marcus had acquired influence slowly, invisibly, through venture capital arms, offshore trusts, and holding companies so discreet they had never been questioned. Guided all along by Eleanor, who had watched her own son grow drunk on entitlement while her grandson mastered patience. "You built an empire," Marcus continued, voice steady, "assuming no one like me could ever reach the foundation. You were wrong." Richard's jaw tightened, his authority slipping with every second of silence, until he tried one last grasp at dominance. "This is hostile," he snapped. Marcus leaned forward then, not aggressive, but undeniable. "No," he said. "It's inheritance." Eleanor rose, her age suddenly irrelevant, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "You taught the world who belonged at the table," she said to Richard. Marcus taught himself how to own it. The vote that followed was swift, merciless, executives choosing survival over loyalty. And when the motion passed, Richard sat down slowly, stripped not just of power but of certainty, while Marcus felt no joy in the fall, only completion. Later, standing alone on the terrace overlooking the city, Marcus breathed deeply as Eleanor joined him, placing a hand on his back. "They laughed because they couldn't imagine you," she said softly. Marcus nodded, watching the city pulse beneath him, a place that had once demanded he shrink. "They see me now," he replied. And for the first time, he wasn't proving anything. He was simply standing where he had always belonged, the laughter replaced by respect, the humiliation transformed into legacy, and the truth finally, irrevocably revealed.